Hey, it's Tom for GAK, and today we're looking at this. So this is the SY-1000. It's a guitar synthesizer and a guitar processor all in one with a bunch of new features. So if you're familiar with the SY-1, which is one of these, it converts your guitar signal into a synth sound. This particular one has got a bunch of different settings on it which you can move through. This contains all of the same features as the SY-1, but it's mega expanded. It's got so much more functionality. It's got the options for the GK pickup, and it's got the options for normal guitar processing, so it does an amp sim sort of thing as well as the guitar synthesizer stuff. So some things to note with this is that the functionality of this unit is ridiculously big. I personally spent like a whole day sort of going through it and learning what it does. Something to note is that we're going to be demoing this unit like you would just normally plugging a guitar into the normal input. We're not going to be doing the GK functionality because that thing would take forever. If you are interested in the extended functionality of this unit, then go and check out some other YouTube channels. I personally spent some time watching Henning Pauli and Alex Hutchins, who do a fantastic job of demoing all of that stuff. So what we wanted to do with this was just give you a taster of what this thing can do and potentially why you might want to use it within your own setup. So because we're demoing without the GK pickup, our patches start on number 48, which bypasses all of that GK functionality. So we're just going to have a listen to the stock presets that come with this thing. I'm going to run through them and then potentially talk about some of the effects processing that we've got going on and the menu layout that we have available. So hopefully there you can hear the range of sounds that you can get out of this thing just from the presets. We've got arpeggiators going on, we've got octave sort of stuff, we've got conversion into like a bunch of different synths at the same time all coming together. There's rhythmic stuff going in. So the other thing to note with this as well is that it's super responsive to the touch, which is something that I know people will ask, and they'll say, you know, how does it respond to bends? It bends. It responds to the whammy bar. It's great. The one thing to note with it is that when you're playing, if your volume doesn't really affect it that much. So if you've just got your volume halfway down, it's basically the same as being all the way up, because you're essentially converting it into a synth sound. So that's something to bear in mind. So I'll quickly run you through how you can adjust some of those settings and some of the features that you can start to include in your own patches if you decided to go for this unit. So in the instrument section, because we're using the instrument input, we have this going on. And this is how we control our synths. So for instance, we can use 3 different dynamic synths, they call them, at the same time. So with this first one, if I just show you the layout of what you actually get in this, if you click on the edit button, you end up with this screen. So on this screen, you can see that we've got all the options for different ways in which the synth is working. So for instance, we've got a common, which just adjusts, you know, like things before you even hit the synth section. We have an oscillator, which will control the type of sound we're getting. So for instance, we can go between different sorts of waveform. Here's a saw. We can change that. So you can see there that we've got detune on this one, which is super cool, which means that we can detune it a little bit and you end up with a slightly thicker sound. So it sort of operates in the same way that you would expect something like an analog synth to, where you can detune certain parts of it. It also has this pitch shifting function as well, which means that you can shift the pitch. So those are the options with the oscillator. We then have the filter section, which is going to be types of like low pass filters or high pass filters. Essentially think of it as like EQ to some extent. So obviously you can filter your sound. Then we have the amp, which is going to be controlling, you know, those characteristics of how you would amp up a synth. So you've got the attack envelope, and then you've got, you know, a low cut and a high cut. Pretty standard operation sort of things on there. We then have these LFOs, which are the low frequency oscillations, which you could then include. So you turn that on. So you can hear there that they're adding in that sort of rhythmic pulse sort of thing. There's a bunch of other things that these things can do, but honestly the video would end up like 3 hours long, so we're not going to go into everything, but we sort of still want to give you that overview. We've got another LFO which will in turn add its own thing alongside the LFO1. There's a sequencer built in. I'm going to turn this off because it annoys me. So you can hear what that's doing. There's a bunch of other features in there as well, but that's the main thing in there. So the idea with this is that you can layer in those oscillator sounds along with sequencing in order to make your own unique patches. Okay, so that was a brief overview of what you can do with the dynamic synth section. There's 3 of those included in there, so you can run 3 of those different things at the same time. So you can make super subtle changes in each one, or you can run 3 super nasty patches all alongside each other, and it'll sound great. So if we have a look at some of the features and the spec of what this unit can do, on the back we've got this GK unit pickup, and what a GK pickup is it's like a third-party pickup made by Boss that you stick on your guitar. You don't have to drill anything out. It slides sort of underneath the strings near the bridge, and it converts your guitar into a myriad of different digital parameters. So essentially think of it as like turning it into MIDI, but with way more stuff going on. So what this means is that we can start to treat each string as its own input, and each of the notes and things involved as their own input, which is really where this unit will shine. Again, we're not demoing that here, but you can use it to, for instance, turn the top 2 strings into a horn. You could turn the middle 2 strings into like a saw wave, and you could turn the bottom 2 strings into just a normal amp. So you'd have all those options available, which means you could start blending sounds. It means that you could, let's say you were on a gig and you needed to specifically hit some certain things to beef up the sound, you could use that pickup to do it. So if we continue looking along the back, we've got the normal instrument input, which is going to be for your guitar or bass. We've got a send and return option, so if you have a favorite effect pedal or some outboard gear, or you want to run your favorite overdrive alongside this, you can plug that into the effects loop that this comes built with. We've got a main out and a sub out, and what that means is the main out can go to the front of house and the sub out could go to your monitoring setup. So for instance, if you wanted to turn off the cabinet emulation because you're using a guitar cab for your sub out, but you are using a cab sim for your main out, it means that the audience will hear the main out with the guitar cab sim on, and then you will hear just your amp on stage, which means that there's a bunch of different monitoring options there. You could run this into other gear as well, so it's got a bunch of functionality. We've got options for expression pedals, so you can use your own expression pedal alongside it, which means that you can control certain parameters that you have with the unit. So you can control the amount of reverb, or literally just your volume, or you could cycle between the amount of compression or gain, whatever you can dream of, it pretty much does. We've also got MIDI in and out alongside USB functionality, so if you want to include it in your rigs, then that's going to be perfect for that. So the other thing to mention is differences between this and the SY-1000. So the SY-1000, fantastic pedal, it does basically the same things as this, but obviously with less functionality. So if you are an owner of the SY-1000 and you're looking for an upgrade, the SY-1000 has got you covered. What that means is that we have assignable foot switches, which you don't get with the SY-1000 because obviously it's tiny. So with these control buttons here, we can assign those in addition to expression pedals and things like that to control certain parameters. So you can turn certain parts of your signal chain on and off. You can turn your dynamic synths on and off. So it's all of those sort of functionalities. You can turn things on and off, which you can't do with the SY-1000. Obviously the unit comes with the bank functionality that you get with it, which means that you can start saving your patches, which means that you don't have to be adjusting stuff on the fly. Once you've got stuff done, you literally just write it using the write button, and then it's there. The last thing to mention is that the switches on this are super comfortable. They feel great to stand on. I know it's like not a big deal, but it feels great to use. The knobs are clicky, which is really nice, so you can feel exactly where the parameter is. And then they also have a really cool feature as well, which is just useful, where if you want to, you can hold it down and it moves in increments of 10 rather than 1, which is a useful time-saving feature. So that's enough nerd talk. Let's have a listen to how the guitar sim stuff works. So we're going to completely not use the synth stuff. We're just going to use it as a guitar processor, which means that you can just use this one unit as both synth and guitar at the same time, which is super cool. Okay, so let's have a look at how the unit handles all of that guitar processing sort of stuff. So if we click on the effects section, we end up with this. This is an overview of how we have our synth set up and our normal input. So essentially at the top here, you can see that these are the synth patches. They get summed together and then you end up with one signal at the end. On the bottom here, you have the normal input and you can see there that there's a bunch of little squares which essentially do different types of effects. Okay, so this is just how this patch is set up, so let's have a listen to how that sounds. So in the first slot, we've got the compressor. We can adjust it between different types. So we've got light, decomp, orange, fat, mild. These are obviously just Boss's own pseudonyms for types of compression that you would see out in the wild. Got all of the features of a compressor that you would need, so sustain and attack and things like that. So in the second slot, we've got distortion and overdrive and things like that. So we can go between different types of that thing. So for instance, we've got the Boss's own OD1 built in. We can go between different types, so we've got Tube Screamer. So let's have a look at the amps. So we've got a bunch of different amp types: British stack, Recti stack, which will be Mesa sort of sound. Let's just have a listen to how they sound. So hopefully there you can hear that we've got a huge range of amp sims in there. So we've got things from like a screaming rectifier stack versus like a little country blues amp sort of thing. So whatever style you're looking for, it's got you covered. If we move on, then we've got options for the EQ, which is, EQ, I don't need to explain that. We've got a noise gate in there as well, which is super useful. And then there's the option here for an expression pedal. We obviously don't have one plugged in, but then we could control that. So at the moment that's controlling a volume curve, which means that they're using it as a volume pedal, which means that before it hits the delay, you'd end up with these sort of swelled things. So you can do stuff like that with it. If we move on, you can see that it sums between the dynamic synths and the normal input, which means that then the entire signal chain will be processed as a whole before it goes out. This means that you can blend your normal input in with the dynamic synth, so you can get a really unique blend of real amp and your synth stuff to make some of those things still feel like guitar playing but with an added layer. So you can blend the two together. Lastly, I want to touch on the functionality of this thing. So for instance, because it does the guitar synth stuff and the guitar processing thing, you're essentially getting Boss's, GT-1000 style unit and the synth in one pedal, which is why you would potentially go for something like this, because you could replace your entire rig with something that is just this and have great guitar sounds and be able to do all that synth stuff at the same time. For instance, if you were working in a function band or something like that and you wanted to just take one unit and it's got all your patches set up and they're all done, this would probably be great for that. So in my personal opinion, I think this unit's really cool. It does the things that I would want to see out of it, which are dynamic response. So when you're playing, does it stop? Does it cut out when you stop playing? Does it bend? Is there latency? All of those things. And the answer for those is that I can't tell a difference between playing through this and a normal amp in terms of like the responsiveness. It feels good because it bends and it will adjust pitch. It's polyphonic, which means you can play chords with it. It's dynamic, so if you dig in a little bit harder, you get some of those things popping out. Not a huge amount, because obviously it's turning it to a synth, but it does have that functionality there. So if you were potentially thinking about an SY-1 or an SY-1000, I think you would go, if you just wanted pure synth sounds with limited functionality, but still a great pedal, you'd go for the SY-1. But if you wanted something that did all of those things and you wanted more functionality, so assignable foot switches, options for more control and all of those things, you would go for the SY-1000. So let us know what you think. This is obviously a beast of a unit, so we strongly encourage you to go and check out some other videos on it if you're genuinely interested, for instance on the GK stuff, because that stuff is nuts. But yeah, let us know what you think in the comments. Leave us a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more videos like this, and we'll see you next time.